Meet Ambassador John Bolton, a career diplomat who served in almost every US presidential administration over the past 40 years. Bolton started as a political appointee in the administrations of Presidents Ronald Reagan and George H.W. Bush. Later, he went on to serve under George W. Bush, first as his Undersecretary of State, then as US Ambassador to the UN. Over the years, Bolton gained a reputation for being a hawk on foreign policy. He also became known for his harsh criticism of multilateral institutions like the United Nations.
Some have said that sending you to New York would be like sending Nixon to China. I'm concerned it'll be more like sending a bull into a china shop.
In 2018, then President Donald Trump chose Bolton to be his national security advisor. The appointment gave Bolton unprecedented powers. For 17 months, he was one of the most prominent figures in the Trump White House, until he was abruptly fired. Bolton has written a book about his experience, The Room Where It Happened. I had a chance to sit down with him in Washington, D.C. to learn more about it and to ask him about his future plans. This is the InnerView. Ambassador Bolton, thank you very much for joining us on the InnerView.
Glad to be with you.
I noticed that you have a Secret Service detail, and I'm assuming it's from the time the news broke that the IRGC possibly wanted to have you killed. Has that been something that is now a part of your life?
Well, it's been in part of the Department of Justice file. They submitted criminal charges against the IRGC for their efforts, and like a number of other present and former officials, I am receiving protection because of these Iranian threats. It shows something about the nature of the regime in Tehran, that this is the kind of policy they pursue.
How do you feel about it?
Well, it's better than the alternative, let's put it that way. It's not that different than when I was National Security Advisor, so I'd gotten used to it before.
There was a $300,000 bounty on your head. How did that number feel? The fact that there was a number and the 300K, what went through your mind?
Well, I was kind of embarrassed by it. I thought it was way too low. Yeah. My only criticism of the FBI was they couldn't get a higher price.
Yeah. Tell me what's going on with you. Are you going to run for president now?
Well, I'm thinking about it. I think it's very important that Donald Trump not get the Republican Party nomination, and I think it's very important, given the challenges and threats to the United States in the world today, that we have a very serious discussion about what our national security priorities are. I want to see what the race looks like. Right now, I'm, I would say, a potential competitor standing on the edge of the water, waiting to see what happens. It's been a very strange cycle, and I think will continue to be.
Your time with Donald Trump as the National Security Advisor, for many people, it brought about a certain amount of entertainment as well. The relationship and then the fallout. He's called you names on Twitter and elsewhere. Why did you even take the job, since it seemed that you two were so fundamentally different?
Well, it didn't strike me at the beginning that there would be fundamental differences. After all, as many people have observed with a smile on their face, he had watched me on Fox News for many years. I don't think I got the job because I was such a telegenic personality, but I did think that if somebody was watching me on TV, they would listen to what I say and have some understanding of what I was driving at. So it didn't occur to me at the beginning that there would be fundamental differences, number one. And number two, I believed that, having heard everything I had heard about Donald Trump, and there was plenty out there, that nonetheless, like every other American president before him, the gravity of the responsibilities, the nature of the decisions, certainly on national security matters that he would have to take, would produce a kind of discipline and a willingness to understand complex problems that would provide discipline, and that we would have an orderly decision-making process like other presidents. Now, I turned out to be wrong on that he didn't seem affected by the gravity of the office. He didn't, frankly, seem to understand many of his responsibilities. And an orderly decision-making process was the furthest thing from his mind. But that was something that it took me a while to grasp, that somebody could be so immune to the sensitivity, the importance, the consequence of their decisions, that everything would be focused simply through the prism of how does this benefit Donald Trump.
Is it of any surprise to you then that there's the claim that he mishandled very sensitive documents?
No, it doesn't surprise me at all. I don't think he fully appreciated the reason why documents were classified, the harm that could be caused to the United States if the information in those documents became public, not just because of the disclosure of the information, but because of the risk in the case of intelligence to sources and methods being exposed. We had a number of occasions where he wouldn't give documents back to briefers. There was one famous example where he had a picture of a failed missile launch in Iran that he tweeted within a few minutes after the briefers leaving the Oval Office. So seeing the allegations in the indictment that have been filed against him and other stories that have emerged, unfortunately, it doesn't surprise me.
Why didn't you help out those congressmen who wanted to impeach the president, who had impeached the president, when it came to Ukraine? The claim was that it was, I guess, the quid pro quo, and we'll help you, Ukraine, if you give us dirt on the Bidens. You wrote about it in your book. When Congress needed you, why didn't you take the stand?
Because I think the effort was so political and so doomed to failure that it would have negative repercussions from the perspective of even the people who wanted to impeach Trump. We have recent experience with failed impeachment efforts against Clinton during his presidency. And while the impeachment of Nixon never came to a vote, the reason Nixon was forced to resign was that he was told by the Republican leadership of the Senate that he could not survive an impeachment trial in the Senate. So that over a period of time, impeachment and the decision to convict had gained substantial bipartisan support. The way the advocates of impeachment over the Ukraine issue approached it was to make it into a political war. They knew they had a majority of Democrats in the House, and their vision stopped at impeachment, didn't deal with what would happen in a Senate trial. And so their objective, which to remove Trump from office was impossible because of the way they proceeded, also would fail to achieve the objectives of restraining and limiting Trump by getting acquitted in the Senate. The whole process actually empowered Trump, emboldened Trump, made it worse down the road. And I thought that was entirely predictable, really very early in the impeachment effort.
Is it not simply a case of you saving your stories for your 577-page book and making good money out of it?
Well, number one, nobody knows how much money you're going to make off a book. Let me get that straight to begin with. But it's also a question of how you deliver the message. And to deliver it in the partisan way that the advocates of impeachment in the House wanted, I thought would mean it would get lost. So instead what I did was put it in my 600-page book that I published in the middle of June in an election year. And whether it had an impact on the election is for others to judge, but I did it the Frank Sinatra route. I did it my way. I think I had a bigger impact on public opinion than participating in what I knew would be a failed impeachment effort.
Well, another guy doing it his way is Donald Trump. He survived that impeachment.
He was encouraged by the failure to convict. That's what I think the advocates of impeachment missed. That it wasn't that they shot at him and missed, they made him stronger by their failure.
So strong that there's a possibility that he could win in 2024. Tell me your thoughts on that.
Well, I think it would be bad for the country. I said in 2020 when I said that I wouldn't support Trump, I didn't support Biden either. I wrote in the name of a real conservative Republican because there wasn't a conservative Republican on the ballot. I'll keep that one for much later. Because the damage that Trump had done in the first term, while significant, was all repairable. But I feared in a second term that the damage might not be repairable. And I think that concern obtains even after a distance of 4 years. A second Trump term could be very, very damaging to the United States.
For example, how?
Well, I think he's demonstrated he cares little or nothing about constitutional restraints, and the effect of a Trump who has already said his objective in a second term is retribution is fair warning that the Constitution is in trouble.
Yeah, he said, "I am vengeance," or "I am your vengeance." I'm curious about that interview you did with Jake Tapper. So you were not as animated by the gravity of January the 6th as others were, who called it an insurrection, a coup. And when you said, well, as somebody who's been involved in coup d'etat in the past, it's a lot of hard work, everybody sat up and listened a little bit. Do you regret saying that?
No, I think it's a mistake to exaggerate what happened on January the 6th. I think it was one of the worst days in American history. I've said that consistently.
But it wasn't a planned coup.
This was a ragtag group of people who barely knew where they were and whose real fun that day was sitting at Nancy Pelosi's desk and tearing up some files. They didn't really know what they were doing. Others may have hoped it would go beyond that, but you know, we hear about this threat of to the constitutional process on January the 6th. It continued after a few hours. I'm not excusing it. I said it was one of the worst days in American history. That's not a coup d'etat.
Okay, so you know where I'm going with the second part of this. Forget January the 6th for now. When you were involved in planning coup d'etat, care to tell us which ones, where?
Well, I'm not going to tell all of them, but I wrote a chapter in my book about the efforts really of the opposition in Venezuela to overthrow Maduro. And our involvement in it, unfortunately, was quite limited.
Were you guys backing Guaido tangibly?
Well, we were backing him fully politically, as were the overwhelming majority of countries in the Western Hemisphere through the Lima Group process.
But officially as a coup d'etat?
Well, we recognized Guaido as the legitimate president of Venezuela and Maduro as the illegitimate de facto ruler. But clearly the intention, the objective, was to replace the Maduro government, absolutely.
But Maduro then was right, because at the time people say, well, he's paranoid, right? He says, oh no, all these people are not homegrown, they're just American-backed. It's the American imperialists who want to overthrow our government. It's a coup d'etat. These people are not supported by the people.
It was the people of Venezuela who wanted to do it. I wish we had given them more assistance.
Okay.
Maybe they would have been successful, and maybe the country now wouldn't be in the depths of poverty and oppression, really unmatched in this hemisphere in a long time.
Is it America's job to be trying to overthrow governments?
Well, I think it depends on when American interests are vitally affected, and in the case of Venezuela, the Maduro regime, the Chavez-Maduro regime, was propped up by Cubans, who were in turn propped up by Russians, and with significant Chinese involvement. So here in the Western Hemisphere, that's what the Monroe Doctrine is all about, to keep these foreign influences away, and in this case, to give the people of Venezuela, Nicaragua, Cuba, a chance to run their own countries. So
you are on the record of having called for the overthrowing or invasion overthrow and or invasion of Venezuela, Cuba, Yemen, Syria, Libya,
no, not
Iran?
In the case, no. The issue in Iran is to stop the Ayatollahs from getting nuclear weapons.
But you do want regime change?
Well, I think the people
Right.
of Iran want regime change. That's why the demonstrations after the murder of Mahsa Amini
Yeah.
have
But
continued.
let me bring it back to my question is, was there a concerted effort in any of your capacities as a US government official, as national security advisor, as ambassador to the UN, of being involved in attempted coup d'etat?
Well,
in those countries?
I've had a lot of government jobs in addition to the ones you've mentioned, and I stand by the statement I made on Jake Tapper's show. I happen to have gotten my role in Venezuela approved by the pre-publication review process of the
Right.
United States government, so as not to reveal any classified information, and I didn't seek that approval before joining you today.
Did any of those attempted coups succeed?
Well, again, this is we have a game in the United States called "Is it bigger than a breadbasket?" And I understand what you're doing, but I'm just not going to go into it any further.
Okay. Out of all of those countries, and again, I'm going to go through the list. It's up on Wikipedia as well, and it's in multiple
Well,
places.
there's a trustworthy source,
I know.
Wikipedia,
Yeah, okay,
right?
well, you can get your guys to edit it and
And
correct
then
the
other
record.
people edit it
Yeah.
back.
Okay,
which is-
so Cuba, Venezuela.
now
right.
I'm not going to go down a list
Okay,
because
countries
because
where you want regime change, right?
there are,
in some
there are
form.
countries, yes, where I think, and indeed the people
Cuba,
of those
Venezuela,
countries.
Yemen, Libya, Syria, Iran. I might be missing one or two.
North Korea.
North Korea, there we go, North Korea. And that's an interesting one because they have nuclear weapons, and you said, well, we could still
Right.
take
You
them
don't
out.
you don't really
Yeah.
need regime change in North Korea. You simply need reunification of the country under the government of South Korea.
So my question is, have you changed your mind on any of those? Or do you still believe that those governments need to be overturned?
Well, Libya doesn't have a government. That's part of the problem. The issue.
Well, Iraq's off the list because it happened 20 years ago. And, I mean, it's been a bit of a mess.
Well, no, we did get regime change.
Yes.
In that sense, the effort by the United States and the coalition was successful. What has happened since then has been efforts by Iran to create militia groups and usurp the power of the central government, and has caused Iraq to fail as a state. That's not what we did, that's what Iran has done.
So Iraq was on that list of countries.
And it was successfully accomplished.
You believe that 20 years on?
Absolutely.
Trump said that all you wanted to do was go to war and bomb countries. He called you a lot of things. He called you stupid. He said that a dummy. He said that people hate you, the most unpopular person in the White House. Did any of that hurt you, by the way?
I don't think so, because
No.
I think people recognize that really for a president of the United States to behave that way was kind of embarrassing.
But the fact that he said that well, this is me trying to add a bit of shine to his words. The fact that he felt that you were more trigger happy than anything and you preferred war as a first resort, there's truth to that, isn't there?
No, there's not truth to that, and he knew it. That's just the way Trump is.
You said he had the attention span of a gnat,
I think I said fruit fly.
or fruit fly. So you learned a lot about the president. What did you learn about yourself in that role as National Security Advisor?
Well, I found that I could take it for 17 months. I felt that I should continue to make the effort. It was not from a political perspective. I don't think it advantaged Donald Trump politically for me to do it. And I thought that as I understood more about him, there was more of a possibility to make a contribution. I don't think that distinguishes me from a lot of other people who tried to serve in the administration. They lasted for different amounts of time for different reasons, but that was my logic.
How did that shape and mold you in any way for a potential presidential run?
Well, I think this was obviously the closest I had worked with any of the presidents in whose administrations I served. I saw Trump almost every day of the 17 months that I was there in Washington, in domestic travel, in international travel. I saw the wide variety of issues that come before a president on any given day. I saw what worked in the White House and what didn't work. And ultimately, although many politicians who aspire to be president think of it as one speech after another, presidents have the responsibility to make the government work, to accomplish things, to achieve objectives that they set forth. And I think the experience would, if I did decide to run, would stand me in good stead.
Begrudgingly, do you feel that Joe Biden has done all of those things that you want of a president on foreign policy, on Russia and Ukraine, and on all the issues where Trump disappointed you?
No, I think what Biden probably does is limited by his capacity.
What do you mean by that?
Which we can see on TV every day. He's getting old.
I see.
And it's not just chronological age, it's mental age. I think everybody understands that. It's a delicate subject to talk about, but it's a reality. In the last years of the Reagan administration, I think people saw the same thing. And I think anybody who's worked in the White House would tell you that the most valuable commodity any administration has is the time of the president. And if the president's not on 24/7, then you've got a problem.
So, John Bolton, hawk, warmonger, these things have followed you for a while. How do you feel carrying them?
Well, I feel the people who use them as descriptions don't know the facts. And indeed, when people say the same things over and over again that are manifestly erroneous, ultimately they hurt their own credibility.
There were other things said about you by Pompeo. One of those words, traitor. Did that one sting?
No, because he obviously didn't have the slightest idea what the facts were. He was talking about my book.
Well, he said I was also in the room.
Yeah, well, he hasn't challenged any of the specifics in my book that I'm aware of, and he acted as though he didn't realize I had gone through a 4-month-long pre-publication review process to eliminate any possible classified information. So I'm very content with what the actual facts are. I think Pompeo was desperately trying to get Trump's approval for his own presidential run. His campaign fell apart, and I think that's part of the consequence.
There are a bunch of politicians who still seem to want to hitch themselves to Trump, keeping their options open. What do you think about them?
Well, I don't see how anybody responsibly can support Trump now, and it's disappointing, obviously, that he still is in the lead for the Republican nomination, but that battle is far from over.
I want to look at where we are now with Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Your assessment of the war and what America should be doing any differently?
Well, I think the Biden administration has failed to have an adequate strategy from the beginning. Before the war, they failed to deter the Russian invasion. Biden said publicly on 2 separate occasions he doubted that deterrence was even possible. I think that's clearly wrong. I think the Kremlin saw what the West as a whole failed to do after the 2014 invasion. They saw the failure of the American withdrawal from Afghanistan in the summer of 2021. Putin had 3.5 hours with Biden personally in Europe that summer, and I think made judgments based on that encounter. He thought he could invade and get away with it. Biden didn't try deterrence, the invasion happened. The first intelligence estimate, which was briefed to Congress, which immediately leaked, so there's nothing being put out here that people haven't heard before, was that the government of Ukraine would fall quickly and that the Russians would win in a matter of weeks. That obviously turned out not to be the case, and from that point on, the Biden administration failed to develop a strategy to achieve what are the stated objectives of every NATO member, which is a restoration of full Ukrainian sovereignty and territorial integrity. To this day, there is no comprehensive American strategy.
How do you pursue a tougher policy, and you can correct me if you feel that's wrong, without risking possible nuclear war with Russia?
Well, the question is how you follow a coherent policy. How do you develop strategy? It's not hard. You know what your objectives are, and you marshal the resources to achieve those objectives. If you don't like the cost of that, you change your objectives. Instead, what the Biden administration has done is string out one series of decisions after another on weapon systems. Do we give Ukraine the Polish MiGs? Yes, no, yes. Do we give Javelin anti-tank missiles? No, yes. Do we provide HIMARS artillery? Yes, no, yes. I mean, this is an example of how not to formulate a strategy, and as a result, the war in Ukraine has dragged on now for over 16 months. So I think that the cost of the war to the people of Ukraine has been considerably higher than it needed to be. And ironically, although we failed to deter the Russians have deterred us from providing adequate assistance to Ukraine under the theory what? That they would escalate the war conventionally? Really? With what hidden army? Where is it? Nobody knows where it is.
So you're saying this is all they've got now?
Well, if they've got more, why isn't it doing better in Ukraine?
Well, they've got nukes, that's the thing.
Well, let's come to nukes in a minute.
Yeah.
This is a conventional military humiliation for Russia. The Russian Federation is 3.5 times the population of Ukraine, and yet the Russian army is the one, as our Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin said, that it's being fed into a wood chipper. Now, on the nuclear side, it's certainly true that Putin has rattled the nuclear saber, but we have had testimony in open session before Congress of the leaders of our intelligence community who have said in public there has never been evidence of Russian nuclear forces being moved to a higher state of readiness, meaning Putin was bluffing, has bluffed every time.
John Bolton, thank you very much for joining us.
Glad to be with you.
All the best.